Hello, everyone. This is Naoko from the GIIN. I'm a manager on the membership team, and I, along with Catherine Zafiris, lead on the GIIN's Gender Lens Investing Initiative, as well as the working group. Welcome to today's webinar. We're very much looking forward to introducing the new Gender Lens theme of the Navigating Impact project, developed in partnership with Criterion Institute. We'll first start with a bit of context setting on the Navigating Impact project and on the approach that Criterion Institute took in developing this new Gender Lens theme. And then we'll do a live demo of how the resource actually works. And then you'll be hearing from Swedfund International on how they've used the Navigating Impact project, GIIN. Quickly walking through the agenda. So we'll start with a bit of context setting on the Navigating Impact project and on the approach that Criterion Institute took in developing this new Gender Lens theme. And then we'll do a live demo of how the resource actually works. And you'll be hearing from Swedfund International, one of our GIIN members, on how they've used the Navigating Impact project to help develop their impact framework. Today's speakers you see here today, today's speakers. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly just mention a few housekeeping items. So we do have everyone on mute, and we plan to keep everyone on mute through the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please send them through the chat box, which you should be seeing in the left-hand corner of your screen. And with that, I'm happy to be introducing Sapna Shah, Director of Strategy here at the GIIN, and she'll be speaking about the GIIN's vision for the future of impact investing.
Great. Thank you so much, Naoko. I am so happy to be here this morning or afternoon with all of you, and thank you for making time to be on this call. As Naoko mentioned, I'm the GIIN's Director of Strategy. If we move to the next slide. The GIIN, for those of you, I know many of you are familiar with us, and some of you may not be, but the GIIN's ultimate vision is to create a world in which all investments consider social and environmental impact alongside risk and return. And we put this out to the market as a call for action in our roadmap for the future of impact investing, which we introduced to the world last May. The GIIN specifically focuses on impact investing, which is the types of investments that play a role in having a positive contribution to social and environmental impact as a driver towards that vision. And we do this through building tools, research, and network mobilization towards that end. So the roadmap, I'll briefly mention, that we released last May is something we put out to the market with the fact that the impact investing industry had reached its 10th year. And it was a document that we put out and actually a call to action to assess the past decade's progress in building the impact investing industry and to identify the actions that we need to take collectively to address the remaining gaps. We focused on conversations with 350 stakeholders to put this together, including one-on-one conversations and focus groups with our members and much broader than our membership. And we drew on our team's expertise to surface 6 main categories of action that we think the market needs to take to move this impact investing industry forward. So there are 6 actions, as I mentioned, and the first one on this list is the reason why we're here today. To enable the coherent and credible growth of the impact investing industry, by which I mean we clearly want this market to have more capital, so that's scale, and we want it to stay effective in delivering the impact that we want it to have, so the integrity piece. To scale this market with integrity, we need for impact investors to have a common sense of identity about participating in this market. And to do that, we need a standard way to understand, communicate, and compare impact performance. And we need to be clear about what impacts we're seeking and how we can prove that they're happening. That's where the Navigating Impact Project and Iris Plus come in. The Navigating Impact Project specifically draws on the insights and experiences of a diverse set of experts, investors, researchers, market builders, and others, It brings together emerging industry norms, which we've definitely pulled from. So, for example, the SDGs and the IMP 5 dimensions. It's built off of a vast base of evidence. So we intentionally have engaged deeply with evidence that's out there on impact and impact performance. We're helping investors to put these pieces into action with clear metrics, guidance, and implementation resources. And in doing so, we're paving the foundation for IRIS Plus, which launches in Q2 this year, and will pave the way for data comparability and industry benchmarks. So from here, I'll introduce Christina Madden from the Criterion Institute. And Christina, thank you so much for being with us today and for Criterion's partnership on this project and on this webinar. Christina led the work on the gender lens investing theme for the Navigating Impact project. She worked to build on the insights of over 80 stakeholders that we've engaged who work in the gender lens investment space. The Criterion Institute is one of the industry's foremost experts on gender lens investing and has drawn on their 14-plus years of experience in this field to develop this theme in partnership with us. So Christina, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So just to give you a little more background on Criterion Institute, for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit think tank dedicated to expanding what's seen as possible for using finance as a tool for social change. And, we've really played a strong role in building the field that's now called gender lens investing. Within that, our focus has been on pushing the field to go beyond looking at the existing company data that's available on gender, which tends to look at women-led businesses or women on boards, to really look at how analyzing broader gender patterns and other social issues and how that can inform gender investment decisions and help uncover hidden or undervalued risks and opportunities. So Criterion provides research and trainings and tools for financial institutions and government funds to help them apply a gender lens to their investment strategies. And we also work with gender experts and other social change leaders who may see themselves as completely outside the financial system, but we work with them to help equip them with an understanding of how finance operates and how decisions are made so they can be part of these discussions and it really ensure that as this field of gender lens investing is growing and gaining momentum and has more people getting involved, that the solutions that we come up with within this field are grounded in the expertise of these people who've been working on gender for decades and understand the actual needs and potential unintended consequences. And all of this really informed how we framed gender for the gender lens theme of navigating impact. And one of the first things we wanted to ensure that we captured was that this theme, for this theme, gender doesn't mean only women, and it also doesn't mean that all women are going to be impacted equally by every one of these strategies. So we wanted to make it clear that applying a gender lens means looking at how gender intersects with race, sexual identity, class, urban versus rural populations, and other factors that are going to play a role in determining where the most need is or where the biggest gaps are, and ultimately where you feel you can make the greatest impact. And finally, we wanted to make sure to communicate that gender is not a siloed issue or sector, but rather it's cross-cutting. It shows up in every company operating in every country and every sector and overlaps with just about every impact area you may be looking into. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the existing navigating impact themes that we apply a gender lens to: affordable housing, clean energy access, smallholder agriculture, financial inclusion, and health. And just to give an example, looking at the existing strategies on affordable housing, we did a write-up on how investments in housing could give special consideration to impacting survivors of domestic violence or transgender individuals, two communities that, because of gender dynamics specifically, often find themselves in vulnerable housing situations. So then another important consideration for our research was how these strategies could both build on all of the information and resources that are out there from gender experts and speak to the impact investors who would be using these tools so that they could feel they could pick it up and not just learn from it, but really be able to implement what was in it. So we spoke to more than 80 investors and gender experts to make sure that this was the case. And on this next slide, you'll see a very small sampling of some of the organizations that weighed in on the strategies. So ultimately, all of this informed what we came up with in terms of the strategies themselves. So there are two groups. First, we have 5 gender lens strategies that we've called sector agnostic, and these can be applied to any company operating in any sector that wants to impact gender within its operations or within its products and services. So an investor who doesn't really know where to begin with gender lens investing but knows that they want to have an impact on gender can just click into the gender lens theme, and we'll see all of these options, read through them, and decide which feels most applicable to their investments or where they feel they can have the most impact. So here we have reducing gender inequalities in pay, reducing gender inequities in supply chains, reducing gender inequities in workplace conditions, reducing gender inequities in governance, leadership, and ownership, and improving products and services to respond to gender inequities. Then we have a group of write-ups. So they're not quite as in-depth as the strategies, but these, again, apply a gender lens to the existing navigating impact themes. And this is where we get into cross-cutting across the other themes. So then with these companies operating in a particular sector or have a particular issue area in mind can see how they might be able to impact gender in a specific way. So here we have improving women's empowerment with clean cookstoves, improving access to housing for women and gender and sexual minorities, improving health systems through gender equitable policies and decision-making, increasing gender equality in agriculture, increasing gender equality through financial inclusion, which was actually an existing strategy, and then increasing venture capital to women-led businesses. And then some of the considerations we had around metrics. You'll see on the next slide we talk about the difference between impact companies can have within operations, so looking at the workforce or supply chain, but also the external impact they can have on broader gender issues in the world. I think one place where this really came alive is in the strategy on improving products and services that address gender inequalities. So this is where we looked at some of the existing gaps in the market. For instance, 1 billion people worldwide who lack access to adequate menstrual health products, or 500,000 women who die of cervical cancer, which is in general highly preventable and treatable if screening is accessible. And we looked at those gaps, but also what investors and entrepreneurs can do and are doing to solve these issues. The other consideration we had around metrics was ensuring that we had both outcome and output metrics to help investors measure progress, but also process metrics. So policies or practices or other things that need to be in place in order to achieve those desired outcomes and outputs. And we understand some of the data and information is easier to collect than other pieces, and we tried whenever possible to include links to resources and guides, whether it was a sample policy or a step-by-step how-to for collecting certain types of data on certain indicators to help guide you in this process. And I just wanted to mention if there are gaps where another resource might be helpful, either something you know of or something that's missing, let us know and we'll see what we can do to either add that or help create the tools you need. So that's a little background on our approach to the gender lens investing theme, and now I'm going to hand it over to the GIIN's Lissa Glasspool, who can tell you more about the Navigating Impact project and walk you through one of the strategies.
Great, thank you, Christina. So as Sapna mentioned, let me just switch this over. As Sapna mentioned just a second ago, the GIIN's broad goal is to increase the scale and the effectiveness of impact investing around the world. And it's the effectiveness piece that I'm going to focus on right now. If we want impact investing to work, we need to stop making investment decisions off of intuition. That's kind of where the Navigating Impact Project idea came from. And instead base those decisions on evidence to make sure that we're working in best practice. So many of you on the line will already be familiar with IRIS, which is the most widely used set of standardized metrics in the impact investing industry for social and environmental performance, and which has been managed by the GIIN for the last decade. And IRIS formed the foundation of the Navigating Impact project. As I'll mention in a moment, the two will work quite closely together when we roll out IRIS Plus in just a few months. But what we were hearing from investors about 2 years ago was that instead of just a list of very credible metrics, they actually wanted more guidance in finding the right metrics to measure progress towards their impact goals. And so we set out to do that. And we knew that to do that credibly, we would need to make those connections through hard evidence. And so in making those connections through the Navigating Impact project, we looked at academic and field literature, insights from experts, experienced investors, and of course our partners' expertise, in this case with the Criterion Institute. And so here's where we landed. This is the Navigating Impact project. And you'll see here that we've published 6 impact themes to date, gender lens being the most recent, with 3 currently in development and several more we're hoping to kick off soon, including one in water, sanitation, and hygiene. We developed the first 3. They're on the top left, affordable housing, smallholder agriculture, and clean energy access. We developed those in-house with expert stakeholder groups' guidance, and since then we've partnered with an expert organization to lead the development of each other one, including bringing in investors and researchers, market builders, and others to make sure that each theme represents the best of industry knowledge and best practice. So that's the 80+ organizations and expert individuals that Criterion brought in. And as Criterion mentioned, gender lens is one that we thought quite critically about because it doesn't necessarily sit separate from all of these other pieces. There are certainly ways to think about gender that are sector agnostic and that speak to those 5 main strategies they developed, but then it also cross-cuts into each of the other pieces there, each of the other themes. And so this is the first theme that we've done that's cross-cutting in that way, and we're really excited about that approach. I will show you this directly within the site in just a minute, but to call it out in advance and let you know a little bit more about what you're going to see in the site, within each of these impact themes is a set of strategies or strategic objectives representing common investor goals within that theme. And within each of those strategic objective pages then, there are 4 main parts. So there's an overview of the strategy aligned with the 5 dimensions of impact. There's an evidence map that shows what evidence and what academic and field literature backs up the connection between that strategic objective and outcomes of interest. There's a starter kit of core metric sets that acts as kind of like a starting place for folks who are stepping into that space and want to make sure that they are collecting pieces of information related to impact in line with industry best practice. And finally, a set of curated resources that can help folks either dive deeper into evidence or take all of that information that we've put together and put it into actual action. There are tags to the SDGs, additional metrics for folks who want to be digging in a little bit further or finding something more specific within their impact metrics. And there's also a downloadable version of the page within each piece. So from there, I will shift over to a demo of the live site and just walk through what this looks like in practice. Thank you. Okay, so here's the live site. And as you saw just a second ago, we have 6 published impact themes to date. And the one that we're talking about today is here. It's gender lens. So once I click within the gender lens theme, what I see is all of those strategies and write-ups that Criterion pulled together. You can actually sort them by outcomes of interest if interesting to you. Just drop that down and pick the ones of interest. But for the purposes of today's demo, I will click here on, let's do reducing gender inequities in governance, leadership, and ownership. You'll see that this is tagged to both emerging markets and developed markets, meaning that it's relevant for both. So once I get to this strategic objective page, there are 4 main pieces, those being the 4 that I mentioned just a second ago. Here's where you can download the entire strategy or strategic objective page within an Excel format, and here are tags to relevant SDGs. The first piece, identify goals, is the overview that I mentioned. So this walks through, using the frame of the impact management project's 5 dimensions, the pieces that you need to know, essentially, to make sure that this is of interest to you. So what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What's the goal? Goes through lots of information on what's the scale of the problem. Who does this strategic objective best target, and how do we know that? What's the contribution that this strategic objective can have in relation to the larger issue? How much of a change can you possibly see within investments towards the strategic objective, and what are specific examples? What are different types of risk that investments within this space potentially run, and how can you mitigate against those pieces? And then finally, what are some illustrative investments? What is an example of an investment that goes in line with this strategic objective? That's the first piece. The second piece is then an evidence map. So looking at the literature that we've been able to pull together, what are some of the outcomes that are supported? And clicking into one of them that pulls up the different papers with links to them, and a note about their study rigor. So this is the NEFTA Standards of Evidence. The third piece then is these core sets of metrics. So this is between 5 and 10 metrics that are identified as a starter kit, or a set of core pieces of information needed to understand progress towards these goals. If you drop down each one of these metrics, then you get a definition. If it's IRIS aligned, most of them are, you'll get the link to the actual IRIS page. Calculation, collection considerations, and my favorite part, which is this rationale for inclusion, just saying, why is this actually important? We've also included additional metrics for folks who want to get a little bit more specific in their impact measurement. And then finally, this Find Resources section, the 4th section, tags to existing and credible resources within the industry that can help folks move their impact measurement and management practices in line with the strategic objective forward. So here you'll see a couple of pieces. We've got scorecards, we have guides, there are tools, some background reading, the resource hub that was recently launched by ICRW, basically just the pieces necessary to move that strategic objective and that information given forward. And so if I can switch back to the slides. Maybe back on slides. Yeah, okay. So just to draw the dotted line between Navigating Impact and IRIS Plus, all of the pieces within Navigating Impact Project are heavily influencing what we'll offer in the next version of IRIS, which will launch in Q2. So you'll see those pieces that I just mentioned there on the left, moving into IRIS Plus. So IRIS Plus is a flexible and comprehensive system for measuring and managing impact. And it's been informed by well over 500 investors and expert stakeholders. And we'll draw on the Navigating Impact Project's work, its approach, to offer evidence-backed metric sets, guidance, and resources curated for each user's needs. So to say that more specifically, all of the work that's been done through Navigating Impact Project, and in gender specifically that was done through this effort with Criterion Institute, will form the foundation for what we offer then in IRIS Plus. So the Navigating Impact Project and IRIS Plus then are how we at the GIIN and our partners and stakeholders are collectively working towards that greater goal, an impact investing industry that no longer guesses about its impact, but rather relies on evidence and best practice to understand and compare and ultimately maximize its impact. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Nauko.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. Before we hear from our colleagues at Swedfund, I just wanted to remind everyone to submit any questions through the chat box. We'll have a good amount of time, hopefully, for questions from the audience, so please do send them our way. And with that, I'm happy to be introducing Michelle Voon and Jenny Jarnfeld from Swedfund International, one of our GIIN members. We'll be hearing about how they've used the Navigating Impact project in developing their own impact framework. So Michelle and Jenny, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to share a few comments on how Swedfund has worked with Navigating Impact. I'm Michelle, and I'm here with my colleague Jenny today. So just to start off and give a very brief background, Swedfund is the Swedish development finance institution, and we work with sustainable investments in developing countries with the mission to reduce poverty. And we have been active since 1979, so we've been doing impact investments for quite some time before the term impact investor was even a thing, you could say. And one of the recent areas that we have focused on during the past year was to develop a more structured impact framework. So what was important for us was to ensure that this framework had a structure that was aligned with the rest of the industry, both for how we manage, define, and formulate our impact analysis and results. So this is where the Navigating Impact project became so valuable for us. The foundation for our framework is based on the 5 impact dimensions. And by exploring the different themes in Navigating Impact, we have been able to really deepen our analysis with the guidance and descriptions it has provided. But also, actually, just as importantly, it has helped us to also find ways to delimit our analysis by setting clear structures. And one good example, perhaps, of how we have worked with this is that we have found very tangible examples and inspirations from the illustrative investments to understand what could be relevant or interesting for us to highlight, for instance, in material about new investments that we have presented to our board. And by being able to also find support for these analyses with evidence-based research that the drawn evidence section refers to, we believe it has given a much appreciated knowledge base to our analysis. And before I get too carried away with the Swedfund's internal framework, I will let my colleague Jenny here tell you a bit more about why we're so excited about a gender lens theme.
Yeah, just a few quick words on the gender lens. So gender is very important to the Swedish government, and that's our owners, so it's very important to us. So we have particularly been interested in looking at the indicators and the metrics to get input on what is measurable for us and what is measurable for our clients. So today we measure gender disaggregated data in our portfolio companies, both on total employees and also the degree of women in management and women on the boards. And our goal and aim is a balance of men and women in leading roles. So all of these measures are tracked and reported, and they help us to continuously improve our decision-making processes. And just lastly, a few words on our next steps, which is to formalize gender aspects in our deal sourcing, and also formalize how we can help our portfolio companies with their gender strategies. So thank you for this opportunity to say a few words from Swedfund.
Michelle and Jenny, thank you so very much. If there are any questions for Michelle and Jenny as well, please do feel to send them through the chat box. I'd like to move on to Q&A. We do have 1 or 2 questions that have come in. I'd be happy to hand this over to Lisa if she can read through the question and provide a response.
Yeah, so I'm seeing one question from Diane, which is, it would be useful to see an example of the investment in large cap developed compared to emerging markets on this metric, and how IRIS plus risk metrics are defined for each. That is a great question, and I think the answer to that here is that Navigating Impact project is really designed as kind of like a starter kit. So while it would certainly be very interesting to be able to do that work, what we've offered here is more like a starting place. It doesn't separate out emerging and large and develop different IRIS risk metrics for each. What we have here rather is a starter place. So a set of metrics that can be used to make sure that you're collecting information in line with industry best practice. And then beyond that, for each of these different types of investments, we would likely expect that investors who are able to would then develop out more specific metrics sets for their individual investments. Although Christina, you may know a little bit more about which illustrative investments are included within these pieces. You could also take a look at those and kind of explore the different types of investments that are illustrated within those sections.
Yeah, we do, just to note, we do have some of the strategies under the supply chain. There were some illustrative investments which were more looking at like Levi's, so examples of larger public companies who have a big supply chain, who have the potential to impact that within their operations. And then some of the strategies we're looking more at smaller startup companies and investments in private companies that are making an impact, such as I mentioned the cervical cancer example. So we looked at mobile ODT, which created a technology that's really transportable, accessible, affordable, and can be used in the developing country context almost anywhere to help screen for cancer.
I think I see a couple of questions coming in for the Swedfund group. Could you scroll up just a little bit? So the first two are around what kinds of companies are in your portfolio and how will this approach help you evolve your approach, and how do you expect different companies' funds in your portfolio to apply them?
Sorry, can you repeat those questions again?
Yeah, so the first one is around what kinds of companies are in your portfolio. And the second one is around how will, I think, the Navigating Impact project help you evolve your approach, and do you expect different companies' funds in your portfolio to apply it?
So what kind of companies are in our portfolio? We focus on three sectors, which are renewable energy, healthcare, and financial institutions and funds. And I would say they're medium to small companies. On the second question, how will we evolve our approach? I think that we have a lot of internal discussions on our strategy for achieving our goals and the impact of our investments. So I don't know, Michelle, do you want to?
Yeah, but in general, it has helped us to, and I think it will continue to do so, to really structure and make a clearer analysis of it. Because I think we have talked about impact for a long time. As I mentioned, we have been active for 40 years, but we have never really managed to structure it in these 5 dimensions and to really make examples that we can also have easily comparable with other investors or other types of institutional organizations. If that answered your question?
I think so. There's a couple more right below it that are a little bit more about the how. So how are you planning to assist your clients in implementing these different metrics and strategies? And then I think there's a follow-up question for our team as well.
Yeah, so this is Swedfund continued answering then. So we have a very active ESG team in our portfolio companies, and we do an extensive due diligence looking at gender aspects in the companies in which we invest. We also put in the action plan for our investments that they need to develop a gender strategy, and also that they need to look at how they're recruiting and look at how we've put an aim over that the leading positions in our portfolio companies have to move towards each other with regards to gender over a 5-year period. So those are some of the things that we do to add value. We also have specific projects like women empowerment workshops and these type of things as well.
Thank you. The follow-up question there for, I believe, our team is around whether the GIIN sees partnerships with external partners and evaluators as necessary to develop processes for collecting these metrics. The answer there, I think, is no. We've put this out to the market and have actually heard from a number of folks that the pieces of information often align with those that they're already collecting or have found important for understanding their own processes and goals and things like that. We imagine that some might want to partner with somebody else to do so, but our goal is really not to say exactly how to move these into practice, but rather offer the guidance and offer the connections to existing resources that can help move it into action and offer the kind of expertise and the evidence in a way that's digestible and relevant for the impact investing community. Both the Navigating Impact Project and IRIS, and ultimately IRIS Plus, are public goods, and so we put them out there and we try to make sure that we're creating them in a way that's very usable. And we've seen really strong uptake on that front. Different organizations, asset owners, asset managers, moving them forward in different ways, in the ways that are most important to them. So short answer there, no, I don't think it's necessarily necessary for organizations to partner with external people, evaluators, but some may choose to do so if it's best fit for their particular needs and processes. The next one. In what ways can this tool better align entrepreneurs and investors, i.e. could it be applied and built into a due diligence framework? Kind of in line with the previous question as well, yes, it could certainly be used to do that. We know of a couple of organizations, asset owners, direct investors specifically, who have used it as a jumping off place with their investees to see whether their impact objectives align, if not, maybe what some of the differences are, and whether the pieces of information, the metrics included, are relevant for both parties. So we've certainly used it as a way, or we've seen it used as a way to kick off conversations like that and to kind of dive into impact expectations and goals more specifically. And we would certainly expect that folks could work it into a due diligence framework. It's being used by a couple of different organizations as a way to look at those early stage alignments with investee organizations. We also know of several efforts right now to kind of create due diligence frameworks that work across projects. For example, Pacific Community Ventures is working on a due diligence project, and I believe Impact Management Project is as well. So certainly could wrap into that as well. I think the next question is for you, Christina, around can you dig a little deeper into the approach of being sector agnostic? Isn't materiality and impact sector specific?
I'm not sure I understood the last half of the question. Materiality and impact?
So I think the question is around how you think about some of these strategic objectives being sector agnostic when there's contextual factors that may make the impact slightly different for a number of different investments. Like, how do you think about something that's sector agnostic? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like Lissa said, these are starting places, and we expect every investor to look at these and see what resonates with them out of the data that's provided, out of the issues we've gone through and potential target beneficiaries. But there's a lot of areas where it is going to come down to whether or not this feels applicable or where you feel it's most relevant, or, you know, just how much impact you think you can have and how you can apply that. Does that answer?
I think so. Tim, maybe you can let us know if that answers your question. The next question is around what guidance, if any, does the Navigating Impact Project provide investors in moving beyond just measuring the outputs and measuring their outcomes? And that's a really great question. So for a number of the themes and the strategic objectives, we have gone through the evidence with our partners, of course, and identified a couple of key outcomes. So all of the evidence maps are organized around the outcomes themselves. Within the impact, the core metric sets then, there are a couple of outcome metrics included. That's not for all of the strategic objectives. It was kind of a learning as we went along in development of this project. As we move the Navigating Impact Project material, the content, into the next version of IRIS Plus, we'll take those core metric sets and structure them a little bit more formally according to the 5 dimensions of impact. And in doing so, we'll make sure that we're identifying a key outcome. Not saying that there's only one outcome for any of these strategic objectives. There are, in fact, many. But as an example, as like one clear way of measuring towards progress towards that strategic objective, we have identified those with the experts and leaning on the evidence base that we've pulled together as a part of the Navigating Impact Project. So when I say that the Navigating Impact Project forms the foundation, it really does guide our thinking then once we use that information to construct the IRIS Plus metric sets. Yeah. And let's see. I guess the other note there is that we recognize that a lot of investors may or may not be able to measure outcome metrics. It kind of depends on who you are and where you sit within the market and what your relationship with investees is. And so we, in the next version of IRIS Plus, will be offering guidance around how to think about that. The next question, are you seeing many Swedish or Nordic funds committing to increase their investments into women-funded companies?
This may be for Jenny and Michelle.
Okay, yeah.
Jenny and Michelle, are you still on the line?
I wish that we could answer the questions on the Swedish market, but we work mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. But yeah, generally Sweden is a very, even our government has a feministic foreign policy, so that kind of sets the tone.
Are you seeing a trend of maybe your peers, regardless of geography, looking or seeking out women-founded companies, women-founded or women-led companies?
Yeah. I think we do. We can't put the specific figures or give you concrete examples, but I think, yes, we do feel a trend of increasing interest for these questions and pulling out more data in these questions. So we definitely feel like we're feeling a vibe of this in Sweden.
There are also a couple of Swedish NGOs that are really working the financial sector on who has women on boards and women in management. So I think that a lot of things are looking positive.
Great, thank you.
Next question I'm seeing. Any suggestions on implementing these themes across early stage for-profit social enterprises? They typically have lean teams and so don't tend to prioritize metrics. That's a really great question. And I think maybe the approach there would be kind of like what we described with the asset owner direct investor, is to use the Navigating Impact themes to kind of clarify with those teams what impact objectives are between you and them, and whether you align there. And then also use the metrics as kind of a jumping off place. So using them to understand what's important to understand about the business and how it's working, impact-wise, what might be feasible to build in pretty seamlessly with the information they're already collecting. I think Lean Data and Acumen are famous for saying that the data that you collect should align with impact objectives. So we don't want to suggest that collecting information that's completely outside of what the enterprise themselves needs to know is important. We rather want to make sure that we are adding to their ability to run their businesses effectively. So my approach, I think, would be to take these and go to them and use it as a jumping off place to talk about impact objectives, to talk about metrics, and to talk about what would be useful for both of you to understand as you're trying to grow the business and the work that they're doing. What arguments or evidence are most effective in making the business case for a gender impact investing lens? That's a great question. I imagine actually that Michelle and Jenny and Christina might have some good thoughts on this. Can I throw it over to Jenny and Michelle first, and then Christina, you may also have thoughts to chime in.
Sorry, could you repeat that question first?
Yes. The question is, what arguments or evidence are most effective in making the business case for a gender impact investing lens?
I think one of the most tangible arguments that we often use is that the gender aspect actually also benefits the financial outcomes for the companies that we work with. And yeah, it's as simple as that actually. And we do draw on evidence on this and statistical facts. Yeah, and we think that has been quite effective actually.
Christina, anything to jump in?
Sure. We usually look at this from the risk and opportunity lens and how applying a gender analysis can help you to uncover some of those risks and opportunities that you might not have seen before. So one way is if you're looking at gender disaggregated data, you might unveil market opportunities that you didn't see before, looking at some of what we looked at in the products and services strategy around lack of access among women to certain products and services. And then on the risk side, if you're not paying attention to gender trends, for instance, at least within the U.S. and some other companies, the Me Too movement, if you're not paying attention to what people are talking about, what's important to them from that gender perspective, and integrating that into, how are you responding to sexual harassment in the workplace? How are you addressing other forms of gender-based violence and other gender issues that may come up? You will see, you're likely to have some risks that you don't see coming, and it may impact you financially.
Thank you, Christina. And I'll do a quick plug for what's happening at the GIIN. So through our Gender Lens Investing Working Group, back to that question around the business case, we will be launching a Gender Lens Investing resource repository on International Women's Day, which is March 8th. And we hope to be able to share a few key resources around making that business case. So for some of you who might be new to this, hopefully you can take a look at these reports and publications, understand the economic benefits as well as the social impact that you can have or achieve through investing with a gender lens. And with that, I will move on to what's next. We have a few sort of announcements from the GIIN as well as Criterion. First from the GIIN, if your organization is a member of the GIIN but has not been involved with the Gender Lens Investing Working Group, please do reach out because we'd love to involve you in these conversations. But very quickly on March 8th, again, on International Women's Day, we will be conducting a social media campaign, Twitter-based. We have a few announcements around that coming up, but if your organization is planning to do anything, please let us know because we'd like to stay coordinated around that. And then, as I mentioned, the Gender Lens Investing Resource Repository will also be launched on that date. Christina, did you want to share what's happening at Criterion?
Sure. So one thing we have is we've launched a campaign around how to leverage the power of finance to address gender-based violence, so looking at a specific issue within gender lens investing and how we can impact that through our investments. And part of that is a a campaign where we're asking investors to sign a letter of intent. We're looking to raise $1 trillion in intent to invest in ways that address gender-based violence. So recognizing, there aren't indices out there that are already looking at this, or portfolios or screens that you can use to screen out companies where gender-based violence is most prevalent. We know that doesn't exist yet, but this is about showing that there is demand to be addressing this issue. So we welcome people to join the campaign with us, and that will be online very shortly this week. And then the second area is a sponsored research platform we have on gender lens investing and market risk. So again, considering there is not tons of data available at the company level, but that there are lots of publicly available data sources from government agencies, the United Nations, international agencies, and academic institutions on gender issues, or just generally gender disaggregated data. We're taking those data sources and really looking at how they correlate to market risks, and how different sectors, different companies, and different geographies, whether that's at a regional level or country-specific level, might be affected by gender patterns in a way that could create risk to investments.
Great, and last but not least, Lisa.
Thank you. So the GIIN's impact measurement and management work, I alluded to some of this, but just to call it out, we're currently developing 3 new navigating impact project themes, those being in sustainable forestry in partnership with the World Resources Institute, sustainable water management with Conservation International, and education in partnership with FHI Ventures and FHI 360. We're also looking to expand that and do a couple more. Probably the next one will be WASH, so water, sanitation, and hygiene. If anyone on this line is interested in those spaces, has worked there, has insights to share, we will put up a survey in just a minute at the close of this, and you can let us know and we can loop you in on that conversation. The other thing that we have going is that we currently have a 200-plus organization working group for IRIS+. I actually see a number of our working group members on this line, so very exciting to see you here as well. IRIS+, as I mentioned, is that flexible, all-in-one comprehensive system that will allow you to kind of step in as a user, indicate what you're interested in, some of your constraints and goals, and give a little bit of profile information. And then based on that, the system will direct you to core metric sets and how-to guidance and resources that are specifically targeted towards your needs. It, of course, draws on the Navigating Impact Project work that we just mentioned, as well as the SDGs, the 5 dimensions of impact, and insights of a number of stakeholders. That number is actually higher than the 500 that we have there. And it essentially builds on all of these emerging norms, this really good work that the industry is doing, and puts that into a usable format and helps investors put those norms into action. That working group is open, and we'd love to have you involved if that's of interest to you as well. You could help us understand and test key questions and look at drafts of the core metric sets as they're developed, as well as other pieces. So that'll also be on the survey.
Great. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Michelle and Jenny, for participating all the way from Sweden. We really appreciate all of your questions that have come in. Great questions, really. And if you have any more, feel free to contact us at the email addresses that you see there on the slide. And as Lisa mentioned, we do have a post-webinar survey that will pop up, hopefully, when you log out. So we'd really appreciate your feedback on that. And so thank you again, and we hope to stay in touch regarding gender and the GIIN's work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.